It's good for the children to have different parenting styles as long as they don't see a whole lot of unresolved conflict. Conflict is not bad, but if they see unresolved conflict again and again and again, it's very confusing for children, right? So if they see the conflict, they see resolution, then they're more open to think and feel that a difference of opinion is fine. It doesn't lead to trauma and a lot of disruption in our life. But, they might even say, here we go again. There's mom and dad, disagreeing. But we trust that they will figure it out. And children need to see that versus the same parenting style, right? So that's the first thing that I think it's important to establish is, fine, it doesn't matter that your parenting styles are different, but let's start to look at those as well, right? So where does it come from? Usually from family of origin. So he might say, well, I was raised this way, or even the opposite. I never had that, and so that's why I want to do it.
It's interesting that you mentioned counselors, because I did have a counselor in school, but I think now that you mention it, it makes sense. It was probably that I needed more time with my parents, and bless them. I mean, they did everything they could, and at the time there wasn't that awareness, there wasn't that education, and they do say that today, and they're trying to do it differently with their grandchildren, my nieces. So their approach has changed, and you can tell that it was just the lack of resources and the lack of education at the time, and I don't blame them at all. But I do feel like nowadays it shouldn't be taboo anymore.
Yes.
It shouldn't be something that I'm ashamed of or that I wouldn't do for my child. I actually want to take them. I will spend the time with them, but I also want someone, like a third party, that they won't be afraid to tell anything.
Right.
Because there is still that sense that, oh, she's my mom, or that they're my parent. So there is that shyness when they want to share certain things. But yeah, I think that's the main thing, that I feel like it shouldn't be taboo anymore. I mean, kids need so much more from us, and it's time that we give them that.
Absolutely. And I try to work with parents as well to say, look, let's try and anticipate what's going on developmentally so that you bring it up first. And so they've already heard the words from you, and that will help them to bring up something related to that topic, whether it's an adolescent milestone or whether it's something that's happening socially at school, just to be able to talk about it and ask the questions directly and explicitly. And they might give you an eye roll and say, oh, that, mom, dad, I don't talk about that. But at least you've opened that door to say, I know, and I know that you know that I know.
Yes,
and
exactly.
So if something comes up, it's okay for us to discuss it, because I'm demonstrating and modeling that it's okay for us to discuss this, right? So, there's a joke about the birds and the bees. Have you heard that?
Oh, of course.
The dad says,
of course.
let's talk about the birds and the bees. And son says, sure, Dad, what do you want to know?
Exactly, because the son can easily teach you these things.
They know.
They know everything. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it's nice. I mean, in a way, you're saying that we should be able to create that safe space for our kids so that they know that, if anything, they can easily approach us in a way. That it's safe enough for them to come and talk to us, that, you know what, I'm here. If you ever want to talk about it, I'm available, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned developmental issues, and you mentioned that you go back to the parents. What are some of these developmental issues, like the common ones that you've seen in cases, without revealing too much, obviously?
Sure.
And how was it rectified? I mean, if you can give us, like, examples.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I don't specialize in developmental delays.
Okay.
I refer out to specialists for that, but some of the common ones are sort of more general pervasive developmental delays. ADD and ADHD are quite, I joke sometimes, I say they're quite popular, common, but also quite popular in the sense that sometimes there's a diagnosis that I don't always believe is necessary, that there's other things that we need to work on, and that's just one manifestation of behavior, but it needs a lot more.
Right.
And I think the root cause of some of these things is spreading a little bit more as well, because we're all dealing with things like nutritional deficiencies, environmental toxins, and these are all things that are taking a toll on the mind and the body, right? So that does manifest in behaviors and things that are disruptive. Tech distractions can affect sleep. Sleep deprivation can look like ADD and ADHD, even in fully grown, well-functioning adults.
Right.
So a lot of it is lifestyle, but a lot of it is also just organic changes in the brain that need to be addressed. And there's many different ways of addressing them, but I usually refer out to the specialists for that.
Okay.
And usually the school and the parents and the specialists work as a team around the child to make sure that they get everything that they need as early as possible, because we know that's critical.
Okay. My last question before we get into the listeners' questions. Do you feel like you could apply that to your family and your kids? Because a lot of, my uncle is a doctor, and he says, I can treat all the patients in the world, but then when it comes to my family, it's like I no longer know what to do. Do you feel the same way? Do you feel like you can't do that? Can you apply a lot of the things that you preach?
Yeah, that's a good question. I try.
Okay.
I try my best. I have a lot of printouts and a lot of family meetings and all of that stuff, but I forget. But I also have my therapist.
Okay.
And that's a rule. I think therapists should have therapists no matter what, because it's a good way to make sure that everyone has blind spots. It's a way to make sure that we're not missing things.
Of course.
And I know that I'm certainly not always right when it comes to my parenting approach and how I dealt with the situation. And it depends on how full or empty my battery is on the day and how we're all interacting with each other. So I try. Okay. And sometimes, they look at me if I say, kids, it's time. They'll look at me, there's the worksheet, and they're like, okay, it's that time.
It's that kind of day.
It's that 10 minutes or 15 minutes. But sometimes they go, yay, okay, let's do that because I have something to say and I want to say.
Nice.
So one of the things that we try to do as often as possible is roses and thorns.
Okay.
So tell me about your day usually gets you nothing, right?
Okay.
It's
of course.
Good, bad, or nothing, or sometimes even no response, right? That's the worst. That's really like, ooh. So we say, okay, so tell us about your roses and thorns. So what were the roses in the day? What were the thorns in the day? And it's a way to just embrace the fact that the day doesn't have to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but there's good things that happen, and there are things that go, with the rose, which is the thorns, and let's just talk about them so we can maybe put our heads together and find a solution, and maybe not. Maybe it's just a thorn, and someone said something, and it felt bad, and we just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But it's
absolutely.
a way. I like that technique, and I learned that from a friend. Dr. Christopher Willard at Harvard Medical School, who's a professor, and he's written many books, and he has really, really nice little tips and insights on how to deal with parenting issues, and so that was something that really stuck with me. I said, thanks for that, Chris.
Okay.
But that helps even, with adult relationships, right? You just kind of say, okay, how was the trip? Roses and thorns. How is this project at work? What are the roses and what are the thorns? And it's a way to just give a balanced perspective.
Okay. So what's your advice for families? Just if you have one simple advice for families who may not have kids yet and for families that do have kids.
One piece of advice. Ooh,
it's a tricky one,
That's
right?
a tricky one. Yeah. I think that you can solve a lot of the problems that you encounter, that we all encounter, if you try a couple of things. And one of my favorite F words is friendship. Okay. Right? If you treat each other more like friends, you're more likely to get to resolution rather than sometimes we throw the friendship out, the formality out, and that whole business of speak your mind even if it hurts. I don't believe in that.
Right.
I think that you should be able to speak your mind, but you speak your mind in a way that is respectful of the other person's feelings as well. Because we know from the research that if the same conversation you started with a softer startup, you get further than if you started off with yelling and screaming. Because then all the defenses are up, the doors are shut. Right. You're basically talking to yourself.
Right.
So I think that the friendship and the formality, even when it comes to conflict. I say formality, but I don't mean sort of, being restrictive and formal in that way, but I mean just being respectful in a way that you would with a friend.
Right.
Is probably the most important foundation when it comes to dealing with things that come up. I think humor is a really big one. I think when you can laugh at yourself, not at the other person. I always say it's only a joke if both people are laughing.
Right.
But using humor through a situation can just help.
Yeah.
I think that those are probably some of the more the easier things that are not so theoretical. But then, of course, there's theories around skills. And I think it's important at some point to have a family vision, to discuss what's important to you, to answer the big questions first, and then translate those into the smaller day-to-day pieces, and try and put them together with a therapist, with a coach, even with a few other families, come together and say, what are some things that we think we'd like as a vision for us.
I like that. Okay, you're a busy woman, I know that. But we will just ask you a couple of questions that were sent in by listeners. And I think they're really good because they go hand in hand with a lot of the things that you spoke about today, especially when it comes to families with kids. So we've kept them anonymous just, to preserve their just their identity and not to make it awkward for them. We've been married for more than 8 years. We have kids, and we're high school sweethearts. Lately, it feels like we have nothing in common. In fact, we were best friends once upon a time. Can our relationship be salvaged? This is a tough one, though.
It's a tough one just because I feel like I need more context and just a little more of the background. But it's a common situation. It's not uncommon to hear just that description of where we are right now.
Right.
And so what that brings to mind is a little bit around the human need that we all have for a combination of familiarity and novelty, right? So we have those needs within us, and they can seem like conflicting needs, but those are relationship needs, those are human needs, individual needs. So the sense that there's comfort and familiarity in the things in the life that we have as we know it that we need. But at the same time, too much of that can be a little bit boring, right? And I don't know if that's the case here, but I'm just speaking in general terms. So how do you combine that with novelty, where you have new experiences? Because that creates a chemical response. It changes your biochemistry when you go out and you do things together and you have fun experiences or you have new experiences or deep experiences together, right? And that's part of the growth need as well that comes with the novelty. So I'd be interested to see and to know a little bit more about what's the context. Has there been a lot of conflict? If there has, then maybe it's time to look at learning tools to resolve that conflict. Sometimes it's just a kind of drifting that happens, and that's not uncommon as well. We just, some people will say, no problem, we've just drifted. But even within that, there's roots usually. The roots are usually around, have we found that it's easier to live parallel lives than it is to come together and build shared meaning and build some kind of common goal, which is a major bridge that keeps a lot of families together. They have a common goal. Sometimes it's religion, sometimes it's a business that they're running, and sometimes it's just a family vision that they hold on to, that they've defined and they keep revisiting again and again. But it takes work. And if you just let it go, then it's true. You can just drift, and then before you know it, you're too far apart to hear each other. Right.
I think this question, as you said, this idea is very common, or this issue is very common, because I have heard before where people are like, oh, but we've known each other for years. But, there is truth to that statement, but then you've changed drastically. The person you're married to changed from the first job that he was in to the second job to getting the first child to, you've been through so much that has changed you. You are not the same person that you were in high school or whenever you guys fell in love. And you just need to get to know each other. I feel like they just don't know each other anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like she says that they're best friends, or this person says, we were best friends once upon a time, is because you guys are no longer friends. And you mentioned that, your favorite F word, friendship. They're no longer friends. They don't know anything about each other, even though they've changed. Their interests have changed. Their priorities have changed. Their goals have changed. Their personal goals have changed. And I think it's exactly what you mentioned. I'm just adding on because I've heard this issue over and over again with just friends. I'm not a psychologist, but just people talking about these things, and it is a common issue, and it needs a lot of work. as you said.
It needs work. It needs constant work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that should ever end.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good, I think, that we change. And,
Yes.
it just makes things more interesting.
Yes, exactly.
I don't want to be the same person that I was.
Yeah.
And maybe I change in ways that are not easy to be with, but let's get to the bottom of that as well.
Exactly.
That's the kind of conversation that comes up.
Yes.
And in the program, we talk about the sound relationship house. And in the couples program that I run, which is built on the foundations of trust and commitment.
Mm-hmm.
But then within that, there's different floors.
Okay.
And we explore the different floors and the levels. And there's things like knowing each other's worlds. How do you do that? Because sometimes when you live together, you just assume that things are the same in each other's worlds.
Exactly.
And so sometimes we'll start with very simple questions. What's your favorite meal? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite, I don't know, who's your favorite actor right now? All those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And just the lack of information from each person around that shocks them a little bit. They go, God, I had no idea. I thought that you love shawarma every Friday.
Exactly.
No, I haven't eaten shawarma every Friday in 3 years. You haven't noticed? No. And so it's building an awareness on that level that's a very day-to-day level. And then once you get that going, then we start to talk more about, meaning and
Yes.
purpose
Yes.
through the relationship as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because relationships have purpose. Families have a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of introspection
Yes.
that goes along with that, and a lot of activities that I think are useful
Mm-hmm.
in those conversations. So sometimes, we have to look at things like, what are your core areas or your core needs right now?
Right.
And are they different from the past? Because if my core needs have changed and I haven't expressed that to my partner and they think that they're fulfilling that, but I'm not feeling fulfilled,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it my job to bring that out and to have that conversation?
Right.
But sometimes there's a socialization process that we
Right.
know is more common to females.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's family-based, sometimes it's culturally based, to just not ask and assume that if I've said it once, then that's it,
Mm-hmm.
or that you should be able to tell. One of the most dangerous statements that I hear couples make to each other is, you should know that.
You should have known.
Or you should know
man.
that by now.
Yes.
And I
man.
said, okay,
Yeah.
if I was a referee, I would have a whistle and I
Yeah.
would blow it and I'd say,
Red flag. Yeah.
not allowed.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
allowed.
no.
We need to back up
Absolutely.
and that's why it's ongoing.
Absolutely.
Because listening is important, but so is expressing yourself in a way that gets your needs met in a way that's,
Absolutely.
that's easier for your partner.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one. I think it's related to the first one, so that it's a similar one. But we no longer have anything to speak about other than the kids. I feel like when the kids are off to college, we'll lose that last thing we have in common, and that's heartbreaking. I feel like I do fear getting into that because I have seen, culturally as well, like the older generations, you see that with them. They're old couples, they're living together, but I mean, their life was the kids consumed every aspect of their life, and when their kids are off, they're just left with nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I find that heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is, and that's a tricky one because when your identity is anchored in just one thing, any one thing, and that changes as it should, then it can leave a void. Right. So I usually say, okay, well, what are the different areas? So we'd kind of draw this wheel of life or circle of life and start to look at each different section so that you're not anchored in just one piece of that circle.
Right.
But there's other things around you that have meaning as well. Because then that's tragic to just take everything away at once. And that might be a primary focus or a primary sense of meaning, and that's okay, which is having your children, and then they go off and you feel like there is still a big void. But it's important to give time and sort of priority to at least, I usually say at least 3. If you can have at least 3 other things that that sort of bring you a combination of joy, purpose, and some kind of satisfaction, and not a kind of not in a hedonistic kind of way, but just satisfaction that is something that you feel like you enjoy and it's good for you, right? So that's actually a transition as well, where we say, okay, well, life's going to change. Are you ready for that change? And usually it's like, no, I mean, I think about it. My children are very young, but I still think about it. And I'm like, I'm going to pack up and I'm going to go with them. And I know they're going to be like, no, Mom,
I'll live wherever they're living.
That's not happening.
I know,
That's that, but to be able to have, I don't know if I want to call it plan B or C, but it's all alternative identities that are anchored within you, but not just on one external thing.
Yeah. It broke my heart because I saw this happen with my mother. My mother, she put her life and soul into, the house. She loves my father dearly, but into the house, to us, and her job. When then my brother and I got married, we're out of the house, and when we were off to study, and then after that, she retired, and she was left with this huge void, and all I could say was, don't you have any hobbies? Like, don't you want to do anything? And it was so difficult for her to find her way. It's been 5 years, and she's still having difficulty since she retired. And she's still having difficulty finding, a purpose or trying to fill that void.
Yeah.
5 years later after, because she put her heart and soul into her job and into her career. So when that went out the window as well, it's very difficult. That's why this broke my heart, because I saw it happen with my mother, and it was very difficult on all of us, because we all had that sense of responsibility to make her feel better and to try to be there for her as much as possible so that she doesn't feel that void. But as you said, it's
a bit like the second mountain, right, or the next phase, and a kind of embracing the grief that can come from one chapter ending.
Yes.
But at the same time, just trying to look at what else can be, what else you can anchor yourself in and with. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think in a way my advice to them would be think about version or marriage 2.0, right? So the function of version 1 was to do what they've done. And I'm assuming that they've done that well, and they're proud of of what they've done, and now it's time to look at version 2.0 and what does that entail? It's a new marriage. It is a new marriage, a new relationship to the same person, and so just kind of start afresh and see if there's some tools that they think they can look at to reconnect.
Right. Okay. We have 2 questions. We can go ahead with them if you have the time.
Absolutely.
Okay. So a lot of them are, actually all of them have to do with kids. And it's amazing how a lot of people put that pressure on themselves when it comes to kids, when really, it shouldn't be that way, I guess, is what you're saying. So this one is from a listener who's saying, I really want to have children. We've been married for quite some time right now, but my husband feels like our relationship is going to change drastically after we have the child. And I know we spoke about this briefly. How do we take this step? So she clearly wants the child. He wants it, but he's afraid. And that's another thing that's always, said to people who want to become, who are new parents or want to become parents, is that, when the child comes, like, your life changes. Your life ends, is what everyone says, or a lot of people say. Yeah,
they do.
Your life ends.
Yeah.
When really it shouldn't be the case. So what would you say to a man that feels that way?
Yeah. Well, I would be interested in the specific fears, right? So there's a general fear. There's a general fear that they have from a reality check that, yes, something is going to change, right? And the most obvious is in the amount of time and attention that they will have for each other.
Right.
Fact, right? But how do we want to deal with that from the perspective of the fears that can bring to the surface, right? And also just sort of, I guess, solution-focused, solution-oriented strategies to work around that. Do you know what I mean? So in a way, even though that's quite a common response, the way that couples deal with that will differentiate them between sort of the master versus disaster, which is a Gottman term as well from the Gottman Institute. In Bringing Baby Home, they'll talk a lot about how you can create micro connections that don't then lead to this big void of, okay, you're off with the baby, I have nothing to do but just work harder or maybe go find new friends, because that's what a lot of males will feel, because they say, well, I don't really know if I can help.
Right.
And even if I try, it's not the same, right? So just to be able to find those micro connections, right? So quality over quantity, but just to be more and more aware of what's the fear because it doesn't have to be the same. The fear might look different. The feeling is the same, but it might look different. So as long as they can work around that with a little bit of help, I'd say to him there's a whole lot of joy on the other end.
Okay.
But
there is light at the end of the tunnel.
But with taking the time and the effort to understand specifically what that fear is for him, and to be able to sort of work with that in a solution-focused way. Yeah. Okay. It's also temporary. Yeah. At some point the children say, "Bye, Mom and Dad. We don't need you anymore."
Yeah, exactly.
And that isn't always 18 or 17 or 16. Okay. It's a lot younger than that usually, cool. Where they're like, "Okay, we're off on our own." Yes. Or even if it's within the house, so they're at home, but they're off doing their own thing. They're bumbling around, being little busybodies, and then you kind of have those pockets of time back.
Nice. Okay. Last question, I promise. Okay. I feel like kids have made our problems worse. They are lovely and we love them, but oftentimes we fight about things related to our kids, like how he doesn't spend time with them and how he feels I'm smothering them or I'm overprotective. It's like we have different ideas on how to raise our children. What's the solution?
Oh, this is a difference in parenting styles.
Yes.
I love these. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, we should have focused on that then.
Well, I mean, it's good for the children to have different parenting styles as long as they don't see a whole lot of unresolved conflict. Conflict is not bad, but if they see unresolved conflict again and again and again, it's very confusing for children, right? So if they see the conflict, they see resolution, then they're more open to think and feel that a difference of opinion is fine. It doesn't lead to trauma and a lot of disruption in our life. But, they might even say, here we go again. There's Mom and Dad, disagreeing. But we trust that they will figure it out. And children need to see that versus the same parenting style, right? So that's the first thing that I think is important to establish is, fine, it doesn't matter that your parenting styles are different, but let's start to look at those as well, right? So where does it come from? Usually from family of origin. So he might say, well, I was raised this way, or even the opposite. I never had that, and so that's why I want to do it. Right. And when we can try to sort of pick out the things that are their individual family of origin stories and say, okay, let's recreate a new story that's our story, and it's specific to us and this family and the personalities of these children. And that's why there's no one-size-fits-all, because you can have a parenting philosophy that both parents agree on, and it doesn't even work for the same children. I mean, for two children in the same house.
Of course.
And so, okay, well, we're going to have to do this with, the older one. We're going to have to do it this way with the younger one. But I'd recommend some kind of parent coaching, which can help them understand where each one's coming from. Okay. And then as long as they're using the right tools to resolve the conflict and not leave it open-ended and not have it take over, some conflict is good. Okay. It's good because it helps you to actually resolve the crisis. If everyone just sucked it in and didn't say and didn't feel, then there's no solution. You're just packing it in, internalizing, and you'll never really get to it. It gets to a point of too much frustration then, and then usually there's a big blow up, right? So conflict doesn't need to mean screaming and shouting, but just expressing that they have these differences in opinion.
Okay.
Right?
I like that because, we always hear, no, you guys should always be in agreement in front of the children, and, it shouldn't be the case. But I like that you're saying, no, it's fine as long as we reach a solution or a resolution at the end of it, so that they see that this is normal. We will have different opinions, but at the same time, I mean, that doesn't make us love each other less or fight even more, basically. Yeah, so we can fight we can agree to disagree, and when relevant, involve the children in, if it's specific to them, obviously not if it's an adult topic, then that's not why. But sometimes we just kind of say, okay, let's open up the floor, right? Why do you want to do what you want to do? Why do you want to do what you want to do? And then maybe there's developmentally the need to be old enough to have that conversation. Right. And sometimes that helps as well, because if, your child is saying, I'm actually totally fine with that, but you think that that's not okay, maybe they're right. Yeah. Sometimes we don't give them enough credit because, we see them as little human beings and little versions, but actually very often you just have to trust that they know as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, I've had to tune into that a lot more as a parent, just to be able to say, okay, well, if you're saying that and I don't find myself in agreement, then I need to spend more time with that myself, because there's a pretty good chance that I'm wrong. Exactly. And that what you need.
Exactly. Absolutely. I like that. I love that. Thank you so much, Devika.
My pleasure.
It was lovely talking to you. I feel like
you.
there's so much more we can talk about. So wait for my phone call.
Let's chat again soon. I would love that.
Probably have you back on. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.